Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we're looking at a 6 bay. That is a rare thing for the channel. I spend my whole life looking at 2 bays and 4 bays and 8 bays and bigger, but oh so often the tricky little 6 bay bit in the middle there gets overlooked. Now why is that? Why are 6 bay NASs so overlooked in the general scheme of things? Well, 6 bay NAS devices have not actually been that common. Let's face it, when it comes to getting your new network attached storage device, your own private server like the Lockerstor 6 Gen 2, chances are that 6 bays have always been something of a peculiarity. When it comes to getting your storage, you're going for a RAID enabled device. You're normally looking at RAID 5 or RAID 6 to give yourself a decent amount of storage, combining all the drives and a bit of a safety net. But somewhere in the last few years there has been a larger intake of users wanting to away from 8 bays, which always seem to ramp up the hardware and add more network interfaces and get really expensive, often even at conventional SMB levels, cracking at $1,000 to $1,200 nicker, and then they look at 4 bays and go, well, it's not enough there. As soon as I put a RAID 6 on that, I've lost 50% of my storage. So a lot of users are looking at 6 bays now because they provide a substantial amount of storage availability in RAID 5, but also more importantly RAID 6, but also provide the throughput, the bandwidth, where you're using even domestic class hard drives to provide a substantial amount of throughput and bandwidth via this system. And given that this system arrives with a multitude of different ways to have good bandwidth on day one and add a bunch later on, this is a very good 6 bay. Now this is the third Lockerstor Gen 2 NAS I've reviewed on the channel. Hopefully I put them out in the right order of 2 bay, 4 bay and 6 bay. But this is the one that I found the most intriguing, because although all three of them have very similar hardware on board, which you would expect from a range, this is one that I think is, I would argue, the most impressive of the three, given the bandwidth potential it provides. Now what do I mean by that? Well, this is one of very few Intel powered 6 bays in the market. I think there's only 2 or 3 others from other brands, at least at this storage level of desktop solution, and with this arriving at about the $800 mark, so call it about $750 in the UK, call it again about $850 in euros in Greater Europe that use the euro. This device gives you that integrated graphics processor. It gives you the same advantages that a lot of prosumer NAS solutions that we've talked about, but it's ramped up the storage capacity in more ways than one. Now, you may have heard me mention there Gen 2. That's right. This is a follow-up to the Lockerstor 6 that came out quite a few years ago. In 2020, Asustor rolled out the Lockerstor series with 2 different CPUs across the range, and it arrived in a multitude of different formats. Now, in the 2 years since then, as mentioned in my other Asustor videos, sorry to be repetitious, whereas a lot of other brands released their refreshes of existing ranges and souped up a couple of little things, Asustor, on the other hand, released a Gen 2 version in 2022 of their range, increased the price by around $60 only, and souped up almost every single thing about it, from the internal processor to the memory to the potential network connectivity and more. This device is one of the most impressive yet affordable prosumer 6 bays in the market right now. And for most of you, you're going to be comparing it against 2 NASs, the TS664 from QNAP and the Synology DS1621 Plus from Synology, another 2020 release. So, before we go any further, let's unbox this. It's utilising exactly the same packaging as both the Lockerstor original series and other Gen 2 devices like the 2 and the 4 bay. Lots of little graphics there, lots of stuff, and it's quite well protected inside, as you'll see. We open this up, have a little look inside. We have a huge amount of protection. I've mentioned it in other videos, I will say it again. Any brand that goes out of its way to make sure these devices, even though they don't arrive with hard drive or SSD population as standard, and still sends them well protected, for me, tick. I will always love that. Why is that? Simply because when you do utilise these devices, what you find is, if they've been damaged in transit like any bit of hardware, they can have silent damage, cracks in the controller board, movement of components on board, loosening of transistors, any number of little small factors that years down the line will present a problem. So any brand that saves a bit of bunts on the protective packaging of a device in transit, given most of these devices arrive from the other side of the world for a number of us, I will always penalise those. But luckily this device, very well protected. So we've got our accessories inside. We've got our external mains power cable there. This has an internal PSU. The PSU inside this device is a 250 watt PSU, which again is pretty big when you think the 2 and the 4 bay had 65 watt and 90 watt, and suddenly we've ramped up to 250 watt. The reason for that is one, that it's using an internal PSU because of the size of the chassis, and two, trying to get, you know, custom made 120 or 125 watt internal PSUs is actually quite problematic. Also, the extra storage base this has on board, it can make that a little bit tougher to deal with there. So it's better to have the larger PSU, but do bear in mind that this system isn't going to use that full 250 watt power potential there. I cannot really see any scenario where the Intel CPU in this, even if you fully populated all of the bays inside the 6 and the M.2 SSD slots that we'll talk about later on, it's almost impossible to imagine this device utilising that full power, so don't sweat. Also, we've got screws for 2.5 inch and 3.5 inch media there. We have two Cat cables there. These are Ethernet cables there, RJ45, two of them there. They're Cat5e, but again, this is a 2.5 GB NAS, so don't worry about this, them not including Cat6. And information on the 3 years of warranty and first time installation. So those are our accessories. Let's get those out, and we'll take a good look at this rather large NAS itself. Let's get that off the table. Got another big old bit of foam there, and there is our NAS, quite well packaged there. It's, again, for a 6 bay, it's weirdly compact. I'm very surprised by the size of this 6 bay NAS, particularly when you look at some of the other 6 bays I've got here on the channel, like that one up there from Synology. This is notably smaller. It's a little taller, but certainly like for like and depth wise, there is a significant degree of difference there in terms of depth. Let's have a little look. Again, it's a metal chassis all the way around, much like the 2 and the 4 bays. So it's going to be a little bit noisier in operation, but frankly, when you've hit the 6 bay limit, even if you're using conventional under 8 TB drives, you're going to hear those drives, you're going to hear that operation, you're going to want a system that maintains a decent temperature, and therefore, I would rather it arrives in a metal chassis at this point. Also, heat dissipation is going to be a significant factor in this device that is worth discussing. So, we'll pop that there. We'll get onto the subject of design in a bit, and of course, have a little look inside in just a moment. But let's talk about that internal hardware there. Now, as mentioned, it does have a Celeron, Intel Celeron N5105, a decent little CPU with CPU benchmarks well close to 4,000. I think it's 3,950 or something at the time of recording. I think I looked at it a couple of days ago for the written review. Now, that Intel integrated graphics CPU, I might add, runs as a quad-core 4-thread processor. It's 2.0 gigahertz per core that can be burst up to 2.9 gigahertz, very close to the 3 gigahertz line there. That integrated graphics as well goes up to 850 megahertz onboard integrated graphics, which is going to be great for transcoding, for more graphical operations where you're going to have to automatically convert HEVC or H.265 media for non-client side supported playback when it comes to transcoding if you don't have an HDVC license for Plex. On top of that, that CPU is going to be great for localized VMs, great for a lot of thumbnail generation and just basically graphic enabled processes. This also has an HDMI out, and that CPU is going to be great for running a KVM keyboard video mouse set up for multimedia locally connected to the device as well, but we'll touch on that later on. Now, the system also arrives with support of DDR4 memory, arriving with 8 gig by default that can be upgraded to 16 gig. So again, arriving with double the memory of the 2 and the 4 bay 8 gig by default, and it is 2933 megahertz, a weird frequency of memory, but still pretty darn fast. Non-ECC memory, I will add, and alongside that, the system also arrives with 4 M.2 NVMe SSD slots built into the top. Let's take a good look at those. Now, what I mean by that is this system has on board the main 6 SATA bays. Those main 6 SATA bays there can be utilised on their own, or you can add multiple drives in a RAID environment to get the benefits of either performance, storage, or both, alongside redundancy in case one of the drives fails. Now, 6 bays is not your limit. The system has M.2 NVMe slots. Now, these M.2 NVMe slots can be utilised for caching. That's read and write caching. So when you're sending data to the device, it will write to the SSD and then internally move the data over to the hard drives, thereby improving the upload speed. And when it comes to downloads and access, more frequently accessed smaller files can be copied over to the SSDs, so therefore speeding up more frequent file access, largely felt in terms of latency and responsiveness, it has to be said. But this system also allows you to use those M.2 NVMe bays for storage, creating raw storage pools. So inside there, you've got 4 M.2 NVMe bays there. Those M.2 NVMe bays there allow the system to create pools of storage that can be run with 1, 2, 3, 4 NVMe's of your choosing and combining them. It's a PCIe Gen 3 connection on there, but the extent of those, whether they are M.2 NVMe 3x2 or 3x1, I would err towards 3x1 given the PCI bandwidth of that CPU and its chipset, but still nonetheless, you're going to get a great little selection of performance out of those individual bays, and it even allows you to use 2 for caching and 2 for raw storage and still have 2 NVMe drives inside running very, very fast internal operations. And you can use those for individual apps, you can use those for preset VMs if you choose, you can run the whole OS of those if you choose. There's a lot of features and services there to take advantage of inside this device. Now, the design of this chassis, as mentioned, notwithstanding the metal external outside there are lots of other things that have been kind of thought of in the design of this chassis that you would really expect from a 6-bay. As mentioned, 6 bays are kind of where prosumers stop and business users get a little bit more involved. So the system needs to be designed to cater more towards that audience. What I mean is things like increased ventilation there on the sides and the top, and the ventilation there on the front for the larger amount of storage, sure. But the fact that the system has that LCD panel there on the front for real-time information about the chassis is going to be of benefit to a lot of users. What I mean by that is, when you have the device set up and running, occasionally you might hear a beep. The NAS wants you to do something or know something is amiss. Now, you can log in via network tools, log in via remote access tools, go via authentication, go via entering your password and 2-step authentication and more. Or you can just read the screen and it will tell you what the problem is. Maybe network identity is lost, internet connectivity is lost, temperature has gone too high, the RAID configuration has degraded and you have to rebuild with a new drive. It is so much faster if you're in close proximity to be able to look at the device and find out. Also, you can navigate options thanks to these 4 buttons that allow you to cycle through the different options there, as well as finding out the network identity of individually connected ports without having to log in or use a network scanner. You can even set the device up from the ground up first time just by navigating those, which is going to be really useful for users, particularly IT engineers that are installing these and don't have access to IP scanners immediately, but just want to set the device up there so they can do other things and come back to it during initialization. The ability to set this device up from dot, just using the LCD panel all the way to ready access and then mount it onto the network and not have to deal with things like dynamic or fixed IPs, is going to have its fans out there. Now, the storage bays, as mentioned, are metal in design all the way around. They are click and load. You're going to have to use a screwdriver, but that's not the end of the world. They're all SATA. And they support the very latest 20 and 22 TB drives from WD, Seagate, and I believe Toshiba is just on the verge of rolling out their 20 TBs, but I know they've got the 18s out there in the market. LCD panel aside, we've got LEDs there based on the site to give you real-time information about the system's status, power, and network access. We've also got a USB front-mounted touch and copy button there, so let's get our photo. Thanks for bearing with me for the thumbnail. But yes, it has a USB 3.2 Gen 2 port there, so 1000 megabytes per second connectivity there, which can be utilized for external storage devices now that we're getting faster external storage in RAID-enabled enclosures, as well as M.2 NVMe SSDs externally. Means that USB having less of a bottleneck than standard USB 3.2 Gen 1 is going to be beneficial, as well as network adapters that are out there that allow you to attach and bolt on 2.5 GBE and 5 GBE speeds as well for your network. And again, there are a host of other third-party supported devices, network adapters, even wireless adapters, Bluetooth adapters, and of course their own 8-base storage expansion to add even more storage to this device. So again, tremendous flexibility, and still have 6 bays of storage at the beginning to be getting along with. So next, let's talk ports and connections. Now, that is a weirdly placed fan, isn't it? I'm really kind of I don't know about vexed, but surprised. Most systems at this level of 6 bay storage would have 2 fans. They've still gone with the single rear mounted fan on that, and it's kind of odd. I don't dislike it, and I know a lot of people who are inhibited or dislike noise in their operation environment are, going to be pleased that it's only a single fan. But at this point, when it comes to cooling and this amount of ventilation and all of that, I'm kind of surprised that there's just the one rear fan there. There's obviously the fan that's attached to the PSU, because it's an internal one this time. But still, only having that single rear fan, it's kind of odd, gotta say. Things that aren't odd about this device, much like the previous Lockerstor devices, it has a KVM setup there. It has an HDMI output, which is HDMI 2.0B, which is increased support and bandwidth allocation and efficiency on HDR and SDR media when accessed externally, as well as 4K being played at 60 frames and stuff like that. But what I mean by KVM is attaching that keyboard video mouse setup and access the a parallel Asustor Portal HDMI application. So while you're running Asustor's ADM software, which has got all of those features and services and support things like BTRFS, support of snapshots, support of a multitude of RAID and backup and synchronization applications, as well as all the multimedia applications, business apps, and more. At the same time, you've got a complete parallel HDMI output with its own app, own user interface, own control running at the same time, all of which can be accessed again via an IR remote control, via a Bluetooth remote control with an adapter, via wired keyboard and mouse. Even network mobile apps that have remote access credentials can be used to configure and control the Asustor Portal when connecting this to a big screen TV and you just want to watch all of your media with your phone as a remote control. Lovely support there. And up here, 2 little red ports. These are our 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there. Each one can give you 250 to about 279 megabytes per second, and you can lag them together, or port trunk, to give you 550 to about 580 or so megabytes per second connected to your network. Indeed, 2.5 GBE is being rolled out by ISP routers. It's being rolled out by most prosumer routers. It's being rolled out by network switch creators and network switch producers, much like Asustor, who have their very own multi-port unmanaged 2.5 GBE switch out there as well. So there's lots of ways in which you can take advantage of that enhanced network connectivity, but more so, you can add 10 GBE as well. Yum yum. That's right, you can add a 10 gigabit Ethernet card to this device and add another 1000 megs of network connectivity. Now, it is worth mentioning it's half depth, half height card there, so you're kind of limited by the supported cards, but Asustor does provide their own 10 GB card as well. And attaching that in there alongside a full population of hard drives, alongside full population of those NVMe SSDs on Gen 3, that's a lot of bandwidth. But I will say that with a 10G card inside there, see 1000 megs, you've got 250 there, you've got 250 there. You can use the USB ports to add another 2.5 or 5 gigabit Ethernet on this. This 6-bay has the potential to fully saturate all of those connections if you combine the hard drives and the SSDs and all of those network connections, and all of that on a 6-bay for $800. Yum yum, let's face it. Now, it's not all about hardware. Let's make our way over to Asustor's software platform, ADM, talk about what it can do, what it can't do, and ultimately help you decide whether the software that this combined hardware-software solution from Asustor provides is right for you. Let's flick over to the screen. Okay, so here we are on the graphical user interface of our Lockerstor NAS. Now, real quick, a quick disclaimer, because I'm reviewing the 2, the 4 and the 6-bay of the Lockerstor Gen 2 series, I will highlight they all arrive with the same version of Asustor's ADM platform, and I will be doing a much fuller review of this software very soon. But because they're all going to use the same software, all 3 of those reviews are going to have this same insert here in the middle. So if you've already watched one of those reviews, you're going to know everything I'm going to show you. But if you're not aware of what ADM can bring for you on this NAS platform, let me walk you through it. This is the graphical user interface here that you see when accessing the device on a web browser. You can use pretty much any web browser, Mac, Windows systems, and there are a whole host of mobile applications as well, something I'll cover more in the full, most recent ADM review very soon. Now, you log in via standard security credentials. You can create new accounts, multiple accounts as well, and you can modify a lot of those details very quickly on the fly. There's also support of 2FA, two-step verification there, and again, you've got different applications that you can use to take advantage of that. I do recommend personally using the Google Authenticator app. Again, it's very reliable. It's one that I personally use, but you can do a lot of stuff there. You can change a lot of the access privileges, a lot of the storage quotas and stuff like that, and we'll go into that a little bit more in just a moment. You can change a lot of the background information there, change a lot of the themes. Why don't we just leave it there on that theme there? And you can download and modify some of those themes as well later down the line. Now, with the user interface of ADM, some of the options aren't quite as intuitive as I'd like them to be. Some of the placement of them, some of the stuff that I'd like to see. For example, the storage manager there. Within the storage manager, you can access and control a lot of those different variables, but they haven't rolled in things like snapshots, which are their own standalone area here within the single storage window. Now, I understand why they want to make sure they separate storage and separate snapshots and separate file management, but still nonetheless, I think they could still maybe tweak things a little bit there on the GUI when you're accessing it. It's still, you know, so much more intuitive than it was in the past, but there is still a little bit of rooms of improvement. But that said, I will say things like managing a lot of the storage inside. As you can see, I've put 2 M.2 NVMe's inside this system, so this is how quick it is. We can go ahead and, if we choose to, take advantage of we can go for an advanced setup there, and from there we can choose to go for perhaps a RAID 0 to combine those M.2 NVMe's, and we can go ahead and just immediately select them and turn them into our raw storage pool. We can even enable BTRFS, as you can see there, on the M.2 NVMe storage, and all of that is accessible straight away off the bat. And if you utilize the M.2 NVMe's at the start, you can go ahead and install ADM on these. Alternatively, if you wish, you can go ahead and create an area of cache. You can go ahead and create SSD caching to work in conjunction with your primary storage there. So read-write caching, for example, which will improve things in either direction. You can go ahead and again use one, or you'll need both of those for combined cache, and you can use those same drives for caching. Indeed, because there are 4 slots, you can use 2 of those for caching and 2 for raw storage if you choose. Very beneficial indeed there. Now, if we come out of there, the storage manager, they still lack a fluid RAID system for me, which is a shame. It's one of the few areas where I'd like to see ADM really scale out a little bit more. But they have the traditional RAID configuration. Again, the 2 has only got the RAID 0, RAID 1, the 4-bay's got the RAID 5 and the RAID 6, and the 6-bay you can roll in some of those combined or cluster RAIDs as well. Now, when it comes to adding services, you know, back and forth, the App Center is, you know, pretty detailed there. There's a whole host of first-party and arguably a lot more third-party applications as well. We've already installed a bunch of them there, but there's still plenty of apps to be getting along with there to sort of look through and set the device up. And when you do install an application, what's intriguing, this is one of the many things that you're going to see during this video, which shows changes that have been made in 2022 to kind of increase security and definitely default level security. If we go ahead and install a third-party application, or even a first-party application for that matter, let's go ahead and install one here. Let's go for the Git one here. If we install Git, you can see that it will let you know that there are things to bear in mind, like in notes and more. But some applications, when you install them, if you are going to be enabling remote level access, it will ask you whether you want to enable port forwarding on those applications by default, or you want to make sure that access is prohibited off the bat, which I think just this little tiny option here at the bottom, this little checkbox, is invaluable for a lot of more inexperienced users that want to make sure that when they're installing applications, they're not accidentally pushing holes through their secure network there. So that's quite intriguing. Now, I mentioned that about third-party applications. I think there is still too many. They've definitely gone through and got rid of a lot of them. It has to be said, they've added a lot of quite popular ones, things like AdGuard, a lot of the VPN stuff there. But I mean, the Amazon Prime stuff here, having all of these, it's just irritating, I think, for a lot of users. I think the Amazon Prime stuff there, it makes sense if you're utilizing your Asustor as an HDMI output going into a nice big screen TV. The fact that you can add Disney, to add Netflix, add Amazon, add your streaming services, add YouTube and that. So rather than using an Amazon Fire Stick as a separate device or like a Roku or something, you're still using your Asustor to do all of those things. It's just, for me, it's messy having a lot of these apps. A lot of them are linked to the Asustor portal tool I'll talk about in a moment, but even though they've gone through with a fine-tooth comb and got rid of a lot of these applications, they could still stand to get rid of a lot of them, and just moving some of them into beta is not quite good enough for me. But again, it's better than it was, certainly. Now, I mentioned the HDMI output. We will get on to a lot more of the GUI and tools here. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the Asustor HDMI output. The tool itself, known as Asustor Portal, can be configured quite a lot. This is that parallel running GUI via an HDMI output that can be controllable with a remote control, mobile phone, or KVM with a USB. And again, you can change a lot of those things. You can adapt it in a number of ways. And this is another area that we've seen a lot of improvement. I'm not going to dig deep into this, but I will say I have done a whole video in 2019 which goes through a lot of these core features, what you can install, the applications, going all the way through, and exactly what the device can do over HDMI, and that includes surveillance as well. But we'll get into that later on. That is that parallel Asustor Portal user interface there. If we come out of that there, we can take a little look at some of the first-party tools. Now, when it comes to the first-party tools, I will say, I do mention this again later on in a review, but there's a lack of AAA plus stuff for me. There isn't a lot of AI stuff. And I get it. AI is expensive to develop, but given that they're using a lot of third-party tools on there, I kind of would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that being rolled in. ADM is significantly more responsive now, significantly more secure, I would say. Also more fluid. The latency has been dropped dramatically. Remember, you are accessing this device remotely. This is not a local USB-connected device here. Yes, I'm using the local network, but I'm still using a device that's far away here. Now, again, they've got the file explorer there, so within the web browser, being able to browse a device, something that is an increasingly weirdly rare feature, particularly when you look at a lot of the mainstream NAS devices like WD, or even the Drobos when it went around. It just seems mad to me that they don't include a file explorer like this, and the fact that it has copy-paste, it has compression, it has extraction, it has sharing options natively built into it. You can even look at images and videos within this browser as well. I think audio files as well, but if you don't want to use that tool to do it, they have their own multimedia application, so there is SoundGood, and in the SoundGood application, you can browse a lot of the files and folders on your device. You just need to make sure they are indexed, but I would recommend going for the Hi-Res Player application, because the Hi-Res Player includes a lot more dedicated audio tools inside to browse through a lot of your media, and there is elements of metadata scraping as well built into that tool. Again, it doesn't look as slick as some of the apps out there, but it's not a bad tool. It even has some variables in its setup that you won't find elsewhere. Now, when it comes to video, on the plus side, there are elements of metadata scraping built in. So as you can see here, if you look at the matrix here as a file, we've got some of that metadata scraped there. We've got some of the thumbnails and background information there. A little bit of the cast listing there. It's not quite on the same league as Plex, something we will be doing a dedicated video on, and I have set this device up for Plex, as you can see there. But unlike Plex, which has a lot more slick stuff going on, a little bit, reviews, trailer information there, not all of that is here. Now, you can, if you choose to, select the files, click the 3 dots, edit it there, and then you can choose, if you wish, to search the internet for some of that information. So you would just put that there, and then you would search IMDb for information there that you can rip from. But it's not as elegant as automated metadata scraping. Some of it has been done, and the video app, it has the features and functionality you would like. It does output via HDMI. It can be accessed remotely, and there's also 2 network multimedia apps built in there in order for you to enjoy your media on the local area network. There's a mini DLNA tool, and there is another media server tool as well. I can't immediately see. I'm sure it's there on screen, and I'm just going blind. When it comes to photos, again, you can browse, and it does scrape the metadata of the images that it has rather than going remotely or using an AI. So as you can see there, you can go ahead. As you can see, this is some food I ate in Wandsworth. That is my diet. I'm not sure I'm going to live much longer. But if we make our way through, it has those tags and stuff. But again, all of this has been done scraping that metadata. It's not been done with an AI deep video analysis or recognition tool, something we're seeing increasingly more common in 2022 on NAS platforms, something I wish was there. But again, because of support of things like MB, Jellyfin, and Plex, you can use those third-party tools if you choose. Now, in terms of surveillance, this is another area that I think Asustor could stand to improve upon, because although there are things that I like, and I'll get onto one in a moment in terms of backups and synchronization, the surveillance platform for me is still a little lacking. It's heavily reliant on you utilizing the client tool. You can't really do a great deal via the web browser in Surveillance Center. If you try and open it, what it will do is ask you at first to download and install the desktop client tool, which is just opening on my system here. And then from the live feed there, you'll go into the settings and sort of browse through, and it feels a little lacking. It feels a little clunky. It doesn't feel as smooth as I'd like to see. Even the icons are a little dated there. And adding cameras, all the functionality's there. Adding cameras, patrol patterns, and alerts, email, that kind of stuff, and working with the mobile application. But you can't do all of this in the web browser. You can't enable AI supported services there, and it's something that I think they could stand to maybe upgrade towards. I know they're a smaller company than a lot of the ones out there, but it's a real shame. Again, I won't go into huge amounts of detail, but I did do a full overview of surveillance on the Asustor platform in another video that should be linked in the description, and I covered a lot of ground there. Not only did I go via the graphical user interface there on that app, I also use the mobile tool as well, AI Secure, and then of course at the end I included HDMI with the KVM surveillance. So a lot of the good cool features are there, but it's the deployment and the user interface that still feels to me just a tiniest bit more rudimentary and a little bit dated there by design. I don't think I've actually changed my hair in all that time. Now, things that I like, the backup and synchronization tools. Not only is there support of snapshots and particularly improved resource managed snapshots in things like BTRFS on this platform, but on top of that, you have synchronization and backup tools in different ways. So you can go to the Data Sync Center here, which allows you to synchronize between a lot of those third-party supported clouds that you're familiar with. And again, this will allow you to synchronize, say, a Google Drive over here floating in the cloud with the NAS and your mobile devices, and use that as a portal there to run your backups and synchronize on those cloud platforms that you've got. But you can go bigger if you choose. So if you like, you can head over to where is it there, the Cloud Backup Center, and in this one it's a lot more of your block your blob object storage there, your bigger ones. And again, this is going to be a backup, so it's not really a live synchronization like hybrid sync or hybrid mount, but it's nice to have all of these rolled in by default on the system. Now, if you're looking as a home user that wants to synchronize with your local devices, you do also have the choice of using the Easy Sync Manager there, which allows you to set a remote access between the NAS, create a team folder that is shared between multiple users, so on their own PC or Mac client devices, they are synchronized with this team folder that lives on the NAS and allow you all to work together. And that creates a synchronized folder, let's have it up there, on your NAS. So we got it here on the right hand side for the Easy Sync Manager, and that allows you to create those team folders and team managed areas, or for a home user, just a folder that's natively visible on your host system in your own native OS. You can even, use the inbuilt application control center, open that up there, to map network drives and do a lot of other features and services, access via FTP, remote level access and stuff like that, all of it built in there. And again, I'll go into more detail on a lot of this stuff in the dedicated ADM 2022 video soon. Now, other things that I really liked, again, going slightly back to that security thing there, is how they've changed a lot of those defaults. I touched on this at the start of the software section. They have definitely ramped things up by default. A lot of services are by default turned off. They're either turned off or you can't enable them without the system warning you first. Like, what you are doing is, not without risk. And I like that they're now alerting you that a lot more, provocatively there early doors when you set the device up. Indeed, if I make my way into my review of this device and go into my footage there, when I was getting ready for the ADM images, when I was setting the device up for the first time, I came across this alert here that let me know when you're setting the device up for the first time that I was utilizing insecure ports for this default setup. Now, this is something I was doing because this is a quick setup shutdown, but I liked that it warned me during that initialization that I was using ports that were insecure. And it did say to me, you are doing this at your own risk. And I think a lot of NAS brands could stand to learn from an alert like this, because it will help users understand the inherent risks and what they're doing sometimes with these systems, and hopefully avoid any things happening again like Deadbolt in the early stages of 2022. Now, another thing alongside that is that Dr. Asustor there. This is where the system can be scanned and checked for any kind of vulnerabilities in your own native setup. It doesn't scan above and beyond the likes of, repairing things with a VPN or scrambling things. What it does do is analyze your default setup and says, this is something you could stand to improve upon. This is insecure. This needs redundancy. You need to change these things. And you can change the severity of these diagnostic checks within this tool. And again, you can change a lot of these settings and it will highlight the areas of concerns, and you can map that to alerts or get support tools from Asustor there to help. Now, that's kind of the main back end there. This is the user interface. There's so much more that I have not covered during the setup of the device. Things like the USB storage, what you can do with those USB drives, how USB is connected if you want to use some of the backup tools to create that multi-tiered backup solution where you're going onto the cloud and backing up to the USB and backing up to another NAS. That can all be managed from within this. But it's a larger degree of support of those third-party tools more than anything that I think some users are going to have to get to grips with. So, for example, they don't have their own virtual machine app. What they have is VirtualBox support there. If you want to use Ubuntu for a VM, they have got Linux centers which will download and install and deploy an Ubuntu VM with lots of different versions there on the side. You just click install, it will download the image and deploy it, which is great, but it's still a third-party tool. There are some areas where first-party tools are still the, case in point, like the multimedia tools there, and indeed Asustor Live for live streaming efficiently, and apps like Take Easy, which allow you to rip content from different sources, as well as the download center there that will allow you to, manage your downloads, FTP, NZB, BT, standard HTTP downloads, all from within here, and a range of VPN supported, some of which you may have heard of, or customized third-party ones. that you can configure on the fly, all built into that ADM. There are lots of features and services here. There are lots of things that you can get to grips with and enjoy this system, whether you're going to use the first-party apps or you're just buying this so you can enjoy watching The Matrix in mad 4K on Plex Media Server. But we can't ignore the fact that there are some features and services that are just a little bit underwhelming compared with some of the stuff that's out there. And although it is intuitive, very user-friendly now, and very, very responsive, I think Asustor could still stand to upgrade some of its core kind of SMB mid-range applications. But that's enough of ADM. Let's make our way back into the studio and summarize this review. The verdict. What do I think? Well, if you've watched my other Lockerstor Gen 2 videos, you will know that I quite like this device. I think it is definitely a stronger hardware entry than it is software entry. But even bearing that in mind, what you are getting for the money in 2022 and 2023 is really legitimately impressive. What do I like? First and foremost, those M.2 NVMe slots, they're having 4 of them in conjunction with the 6 bays of SATA storage, making this a 10-bay NAS technically. Absolutely love that. Even if the M.2 NVMe slots are Gen 3 × 1 or Gen 2, restricting them to 1 or 2,000 megs a piece, that still is a great amount of storage potential available on this. Alongside that, it being such a big upgrade over its predecessor, for only $60 extra, yum yum, sign me up, buttercup. Next up, this device having optional 10 GBE is a great add-on for this 6-bay device, and the fact that, again, that allows it to be able to better saturate that storage, to better saturate the network connectivity, is only going to get better. Another thing, I like how this and the other 2 and the 4-bay serve as fantastic alternatives to Synology and QNAP right now, utilising a lot of the features that both of those brands have rigidly only included in their respective platforms, with this Asustor Lockerstor taking BTRFS, taking the Intel Celeron processor there, taking PCI upgrades and the use of M.2 NVMe's as raw storage. Synology and QNAP didn't invent those. They're not the only ones that provide them. But right now, the Lockerstor is the only one that provides you all of those in a single package. And that doesn't include the LCD panel, the HDMI output, and stuff like that. Alongside that, things like that HDMI being 2.0B, one of the only desktop NASs in the market right now that has that, as well as support of USB 3.2 Gen 2 and setting the device up over LCD. Those are lovely little extras that I think Asustor could well stand to be a bit noisier about, because they really do make this device particularly impressive. That said, nothing's perfect, and nor is this. Things that I'm, less keen on, as mentioned in my other videos. I wish it had a fluid RAID system there. Things like Synology Hybrid RAID or even TerraMaster's T-RAID, I'm surprised Asustor has not developed a fluid RAID system yet, and I hope they do very, very soon, at least at the time of recording. Also, if noise is a concern, this is going to be a bit more of a hum, vibration, existing ambient noise NAS around you if you're in close proximity there, so do bear that in mind with that metal chassis. Also, again, a lot of this is going to be similar to my other videos. This surveillance application does feel a little clunky and a little dated, and I wish they would kind of revisit that and soup it up a little bit and make it a little bit more browser compatible, because I know these things take time, but that app has not seen a tremendous number of updates in the years that I have seen it. Same goes for a lot of ADM. It is a lot more polished, a lot more responsive, running on a Bella Linux kernel right now, and the features and services that it has on board in terms of security, backups, data integrity, and more have improved vastly over the years. But still, nonetheless, there still seems to be a lot of chaff on that App Center, less than there was, but it's still there, and it lacks a lot of the AAA killer features of DSM and QTS respectively from those other NAS brands in terms of AI supported services there on board, or some of the larger enterprise grade stuff, with Asustor tending to rely on third-party apps like Docker, tending to rely on third-party applications for VMs and stuff like that, like VirtualBox, to provide those services rather than having their own in-house, which I think a lot of users are going to be less keen on when they're buying, if they're trying to buy a one ecosystem solution. And then, of course, I mentioned in the other videos, we've got to touch on it again, they have been targeted by ransomware attacks in 2022. It's, ransomware is a thing in 2022, with so many services that we use every day being online based, and I'm including your Googles, your Apples, and more, along with the console services. No one is immune, but It is the way they were hit and their response to that, which a lot of users will still remember. And they have made a lot of penance to, reverse that. They have changed a lot of stuff about their platform. Definitely closed up any security vulnerabilities that were found. And again, they didn't build Linux. On top of that, they have tried to find other ways to help people restore their data, making lots of recommendations and guides online, so fair play to them for that. But I do think a lot of users who will look into Asustor will still wonder about those vulnerabilities, which are closed, but still they were a target, and it would be remiss for me to not at least highlight it in the video. But that aside, I do think this is still one of the best 6-bay NASes I've seen for a very, very long time. And if you're buying a network attached storage device for the hardware and you want to use your own third-party stuff, or at least a NAS that supports a lot of third-party stuff, this is a great, great choice for you to go for. And at $800 makes it one of the most affordable prosumer 6-bays in the market right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. There are links to a full review and other reviews on Asustor products in the link below. I ran out of there right there at the end, didn't I? If you want to learn more, use those links and guides. Subscribe to the channel as we talk about the whole subject of network attached storage and data storage in general in 2022 and 2023. Use the free advice section over on NAS Compares if you want to learn more and need some assistance. Or if you want a little bit more community support, use the free advice forum at Ask NAS Compares, where me, Eddie and other community members will help answer your queries and help you get the right data storage solution for you. And finally, if, and a big if, you were going to buy this device from Amazon, and if this video helped you choose it, then why not use the link to Amazon in the description? It costs you nothing extra, and anything you buy via that link, we at NAS Compares get a kickback, as we are Amazon associates, and therefore that money goes straight back into helping us do what we do. So if I helped you make this decision, and if you're going to go to Amazon, why not use the links anyway? But otherwise, it's a free internet, do what you want. Other than that, I will see you next time.